They say the view from the top is breathtaking, but they never tell you how thin the air is or how easily the silence can suffocate you. I am standing in the shadows of my own home, a 70-story glass sanctuary perched above the frantic heart of Manhattan, watching the man I love prepare to destroy me. It is a strange thing to realize that your life has become a crime scene before the first drop of blood has even been spilled. You think you know the person sleeping next to you. You think you have built a fortress that no one can breach. But the most dangerous enemy is never the one at the gates. It is the one you invited into your bed. My name is Elena Vance. I am 40 years old. I am a woman who turned a few sketches and a fierce, unrelenting ambition into a real estate empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. To the world, I am a titan, a force of nature in a suit, a woman who does not know the meaning of the word failure. But as I stand here in the dark, I realize I have failed at the only thing that truly mattered. I failed to see the rot in my own marriage. Behind the closed door of his private study, my husband, Julian Vance, is drowning. Through the sliver of space in the doorway, I can see the blue, ghostly light of a smartphone reflecting off his sharp features. It is not the phone I bought him for our anniversary. It is the secret one. The one he keeps hidden in a gym locker, buried under layers of designer workout gear and calculated lies. I watch his hands shake as he scrolls through a screen filled with numbers that would make a weaker man's heart stop. $450,000. That is the figure etched into his soul tonight. A mountain of gambling debt, a string of sports bets that were supposed to be his salvation but became his noose. He is bleeding money, a slow and steady hemorrhage that he has managed to hide from me for months. While I spent my 16-hour days negotiating skyscraper leases and managing 3,000 employees, Julian was in the dark, chasing the rush of a miracle that never came. The contrast between us has never felt so violent. My world is built on the cold, hard reality of discipline and results. I grew up with nothing, fighting through zoning boards and skeptical investors who never thought a woman could build the skyline. I learned early that respect is earned in sweat and blood. Julian, however, was born for the spotlight, but not the stage. He is my trophy husband, a man of effortless charm and devastating beauty who transitioned from a struggling architect into the supportive spouse of a billionaire. To the cameras at the Metropolitan Museum of Art or the charity galas in the Hamptons, he is the perfect partner. The steady hand on the small of my back, the man who smiles while I take the podium. He plays the role with such perfection that I almost believed it myself. I almost forgot that a man who does not build his own world will eventually grow to resent the one who does. I can hear the dull vibration of his hidden phone against the mahogany desk. It sounds like a death rattle in the stillness of the penthouse. Every buzz is a reminder of a debt collector, a high-interest lender, or perhaps the other secret he is keeping. The girl who believes his lies about a cold, work-obsessed wife. He reflects on our marriage not as a covenant, but as a cage. To the world, we are the gold standard of success. In reality, we are two strangers living in a house of cards. He thinks he is clever. He thinks the lies he has stacked so carefully have become a new kind of truth. He doesn't know that I have already seen the cracks. He doesn't know that I have traced the missing $80,000 from our joint account, or that I know about the frantic calls he makes from the gym at 6 a.m. The pressure is changing him. As I watch him drag a tired hand down his face, I don't see the man who proposed to me under the stars in Amalfi. I see a predator backed into a corner. He is a supportive husband who is secretly draining the lifeblood of our finances to feed a ghost. There is a terrifying clarity in his eyes tonight, a coldness that I have never seen before. It is the look of a man who has stopped looking for a way out and has started looking for an ending. He thinks our prenuptial agreement is an airtight tomb that will leave him with nothing if he leaves. He knows that in a divorce, he walks away with exactly what he brought in, $0. And Julian Vance is not a man who can survive on nothing. The clock on the wall ticks toward 12:45 in the morning, and the city below us is a sea of indifferent lights. I realize now that my success didn't just build a kingdom. It built a target on my back. The man I called my rock is actually the weight that intends to pull me into the depths. He is sitting there, calculating the cost of my life against the weight of his debt. And I am standing here, realizing that the unthinkable has already begun. Our marriage was not a sanctuary. It was a countdown. And as the silence of the penthouse grows heavier, I know that the person I love is already gone, replaced by someone who is waiting for the lights to go out so he can finally take what he thinks he deserves. The crack in our foundation is no longer a secret. It is an abyss, and we are both standing on the edge, waiting to see who falls first. She was 22 years old, a walking canvas of youthful optimism and stolen dreams. Her name is Maya Thorne, a girl who works in a high-end boutique and moonlights as an aspiring artist in Chelsea. I remember the afternoon I first saw her image on a screen, a ghost of a girl who had no idea she was being used as a weapon against me. Julian met her at a minimalist art gallery, a place where the walls were as white as a fresh lie. He didn't tell her he was married to a titan of industry. No, he played the part of the tragic hero, the neglected soul trapped in a cold, loveless union. He told her that my success was a frost that had killed our intimacy, claiming that my work-obsessed nature had left him invisible in his own home. He turned my ambition, the very thing that provided him with his bespoke suits and his luxury lifestyle, into a weapon of husband infidelity. To Maya, he was a man seeking a sanctuary. To me, he was a cheating husband practicing the oldest script in the book. Maya believed him. At 22, you still think love can fix a broken man, especially one who promises you a downtown studio and a life where you will never feel small. She didn't know that the money he spent on her expensive dinners and silk blouses came from the accounts I built. She didn't know that the life he promised her was a fantasy funded by a woman he was currently betraying. Their affair was built on the shaky foundation of my supposed cruelty. A classic story of betrayal that you only expect to read in a Reddit relationship story. She looked at him with stars in her eyes, unaware that she was just a placeholder in a much larger, much darker game. Julian whispered promises of a future together, a life where they would be free from the shadow of the cold Elena Vance. But even then, Julian knew he couldn't afford that future. He was a man with a taste for the exquisite, but a soul that was completely bankrupt. Back in the present, the air in my private office is thick with the scent of old paper and new betrayal. I watch through the hidden camera lens as Julian kneels before the wall safe, hidden behind the portrait of my father. His fingers are steady as he enters the code I gave him 3 years ago when I thought trust was the bedrock of my marriage. He is not looking for the emergency cash or the heirloom jewelry. His eyes are hunting for something far more valuable. When the heavy steel door swings open, he pulls out a thick folder bound in blue leather. It is my last will and testament. I watch his face as he reads the documents, his eyes darting across the legalese I drafted when I still believed our love was immortal. If Elena Vance were to pass away, every asset, every skyscraper, every single dollar of my real estate empire would transfer to one person. Him. Sole heir. The change in his expression is chilling. The desperation that had haunted his face for weeks vanishes, replaced by a terrifying clinical clarity. He isn't looking at a document. He is looking at a map to his salvation. In that moment, the affair with Maya Thorne shifts from a distraction into a motive. He realizes that he doesn't need a divorce that would leave him with nothing. He doesn't need to beg for a bailout. He needs an ending. A clean, final, and absolute ending. The broken trust of our relationship has evolved into something far more predatory. As he carefully places the will back into the safe and clicks the door shut, I feel a coldness settle into my marrow that no designer coat could ever warm. He is no longer just a husband who cheated. He is an architect planning my execution. The man I have loved for a decade just decided that I am worth more to him as a memory than as a wife. I am no longer his partner. I am his lottery ticket, and the drawing is about to begin. The restaurant was a cathedral of glass and candlelight perched at the edge of the Hudson River. It was our place. The sanctuary where we had celebrated 3 anniversaries and toasted to 1,000 promises. Julian looked across the table at me, his eyes brimming with a warmth that would have fooled me a week ago. He toasted to our future, his voice a smooth cello melody that vibrated with a sincerity that made my skin crawl. When I excused myself to the restroom for a brief moment, I did not see his hand move. I did not see the tiny vial or the practiced, surgical flick of his wrist over my wine. I returned to find him smiling, his face a mask of perfect devotion, my glass of Cabernet waiting like a dark, silent witness. I took a deep sip. It was rich, earthy, and perfectly chilled. Within 20 minutes, the edges of the world began to fray. The laughter of the other diners sounded like they were shouting from underwater. My vision blurred, a soft, suffocating gray haze creeping in from the corners of my eyes. Julian gripped my hand, his touch firm and suddenly stifling. He told me I looked tired, that the crushing stress of the real estate empire was finally catching up to me. He suggested we leave early, and I let him lead me to the car, my legs feeling like they were made of lead and belonged to a stranger. As we pulled away from the shimmering, indifferent lights of Manhattan, a heavy chemical lethargy settled into my marrow. I leaned my head against the cool window, watching the neon skyscrapers dissolve into the oppressive shadows of the winding roads in upstate New York. Julian said there was a shortcut through the wooded reservoir area to avoid the midnight traffic. The smooth pavement soon gave way to rough gravel, the sound of the tires crunching like breaking teeth beneath us. The streetlights vanished entirely, replaced by the skeletal reach of oak trees that seemed to lean in, whispering of secrets buried in the dirt. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. "Julian," I whispered, my voice sounding thick and alien even to my own ears. "This is not the way home." He did not answer. He kept his eyes fixed on the black ribbon of the road, his profile as sharp and unforgiving as a flint blade. He brought the vehicle to a sudden halt in a clearing, where the darkness was so absolute it felt like a physical weight pressing against the glass. He turned off the engine. The sudden absence of sound was more terrifying than a scream. He finally looked at me, and the man I had loved for a decade was gone. In his place sat a stranger, with eyes as cold and vacant as the Atlantic. He told me he knew about the wall safe. He told me he had read every single word of my will. He spoke about his $450,000 in debt with the detached, chilling tone of a businessman discussing a minor loss. He said he was drowning, and I was the anchor he finally needed to cut to reach the surface. Panic surged through me, sharp and jagged, but my muscles refused to obey my mind. My fingers were numb, my breathing shallow and ragged. Julian opened my door and helped me out, but his grip was not one of care. It was a disposal. My knees buckled the moment my feet touched the frozen earth. I collapsed onto the gravel, the sharp stones biting into my palms, but I could not even flinch. I looked up at him, my vision swimming in the dark as he loomed over me like a predatory shadow. I tried to scream, to beg, but only a broken, pathetic whimper escaped my throat. He told me I was never the partner I thought I was. He said I was merely a convenience, a safety net that had finally worn thin and stayed too long. He looked down at me with an indifference that was more painful than the poison burning in my veins. He stepped back, the car door clicking shut with a finality that echoed through the ancient trees. The engine roared to life, and the twin beams of the headlights swept over me one last time before fading into the distance. I lay there on the cold, unforgiving ground, paralyzed and alone in the suffocating dark. My empire, my success, my life, it all meant nothing out here. As the silence returned, heavier and colder than before, I realized that the man I had trusted with my soul had left me to become a ghost in the woods. I was dying, and the last thing I saw was the darkness he had traded my life for. The cold was a living thing, a predatory chill that seeped through my silk dress and settled deep into my bones as I lay paralyzed on the forest floor. I watched the red taillights of my own car bleed into the darkness until they were nothing more than a memory of a life that had just been stolen from me. I was a titan of industry, a woman who had built empires from glass and steel. Yet here I was, reduced to a heap of discarded flesh on a gravel road in the middle of nowhere. My breath came in shallow, jagged gasps, each one a desperate plea to a god I hadn't spoken to in years. The silence of the ancient trees was suffocating, a heavy shroud that promised only an unmarked grave. Just as the shadows began to pull me under, a pair of headlights cut through the gloom like twin daggers of light. A black SUV slowed to a crawl, its tires crunching on the stone with a rhythmic, steady heartbeat. A man stepped out, his silhouette tall and imposing against the white glare of the high beams. I felt strong, steady arms hooked beneath my knees and shoulders, lifting me with a sudden, jarring urgency that forced the air from my lungs. It was Liam Sterling, my fiercest competitor. The man who had spent the last 10 years trying to outmaneuver me in every boardroom in Manhattan was now the only person standing between me and the void. I drifted in a sea of fever and shadows for hours until I woke to the sterile, rhythmic pulse of a heart monitor. The air smelled of ozone and antiseptic, sharp enough to cut through the lingering chemical fog in my brain. I was in a private medical clinic, a secret fortress of healing owned by Liam's mother, Dr. Sarah Sterling. She was a woman of formidable grace, with silver hair and eyes that had seen every manner of human cruelty and survived it all. Liam stood by the large window, watching the sunrise over a horizon I was never meant to see again. He told me he had been driving to his cabin to escape the city when he saw the glint of my dress in the dirt. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't have to. The news was already buzzing with frantic reports of my disappearance. And Julian was likely already practicing his role as the grieving widower in front of our bedroom mirror. A singular burning clarity ignited in my chest, a fire that consumed the last remnants of the woman who had loved Julian Vance. I realized the depth of his betrayal was not just a crack in our marriage, but a total, calculated annihilation of my existence. Right then, I made a choice that would change the trajectory of our lives. I would stay dead. I would become a ghost, a silent observer in the ruin of my own life, until the exact moment I could haunt him into a prison cell. To the world, Elena Vance was a tragedy. To Julian, I was a massive inheritance. But in this room, I was becoming a revolution. The clinic room became my command center, a secret safe house where we dissected the anatomy of a murder. Detective Clara Hayes joined us under the cover of night, her presence a cold breeze of reality in a world of nightmares. She was a woman of few words and absolute, devastating action. Together, we began to harvest the nails for Julian's coffin. We secured the security footage from the Harborside restaurant, watching in high definition as Julian's hand hovered over my wine glass for 10 seconds. It was a small, clinical movement that carried the weight of a death sentence. We recovered every byte of data from his secret phone, a digital record of a cheating husband's descent into absolute madness. I read the messages to Maya Thorne, each word a jagged shard of glass in my soul. He promised her my life. He promised her a cafe in the city, a downtown apartment, and a future built on the ashes of my 16-hour workdays. The forensic toxicology report arrived like a final verdict, confirming the presence of a neurotoxin in my blood that was meant to simulate a sudden, untraceable stroke. As I looked at the evidence spread across the table, the last of my tears dried into a mask of stone. I was no longer a heartbroken wife or a victim of husband infidelity. I was a strategist. I was the architect of a revenge so absolute that there would be no escape for the man who tried to bury me. My name is Elena Vance. I am 40 years old, and I am the hunter now. 3 days had passed since the night the world thought I died. Julian walked into the prestigious offices of the private wealth bank with the measured, somber grace of a professional mourner. He wore his finest charcoal suit, the one I had tailored for him in London, and a silk tie as black as the heart beating beneath it. I watched him through the security feed in the adjacent room, seeing the way he adjusted his cufflinks and practiced a hollow, distant look in the mirrored elevator doors. He thought he was walking toward a fortune. He thought the $450,000 in debt was about to evaporate into the thin air of my inheritance. He believed he had finally won the game he started in the dark woods. He walked past the rows of mahogany desks with his head bowed, the perfect image of a grieving widower ready to shoulder the burden of a billionaire empire. When the heavy mahogany door to conference room 7 finally opened, he did not see a bank representative or a pile of legal documents waiting for his signature. He saw me. I was sitting at the head of the long obsidian table, dressed in a sharp ivory suit that stood as a silent, defiant contrast to the funereal darkness he had brought with him. I watched the blood drain from his face, his jaw dropping as if he had seen a specter rise from the grave. For a heartbeat, the silence was so thick I could hear the frantic, uneven thumping of his pulse against the stillness of the room. He whispered my name like a prayer to a ghost that had refused to stay buried. "This is not possible," he stammered, his legs buckling as he reached for the back of a leather chair. I did not blink. I did not offer him the comfort of a lie or the mercy of an explanation. I simply pushed a thick blue folder across the table toward him. "These are the divorce papers," I said, my voice as steady and unyielding as the foundation of the skyscrapers I built. "I filed them this morning under the clauses of attempted homicide, fraud, and gross infidelity." I watched his trembling hands touch the paper, the reality of his failure finally sinking in like a stone in deep water. Under the airtight prenuptial agreement he had so arrogantly signed years ago, an attempt on my life, or any criminal act against the marriage, nullified every single claim he had to my estate. He was walking away with nothing. $0. Not a single cent of my empire would ever touch his hands. He had traded his soul and his freedom for an inheritance that turned to ash the moment I took a breath in the clinic. Detective Hayes stepped out from the shadows behind the door, the silver handcuffs glinting under the recessed lighting with a cold, unforgiving light. The sharp, metallic click of the restraints was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a cage closing on the man who had tried to turn me into a ghost. The trial was a blur of black robes and whispered testimonies, but the final verdict was a thunderclap that echoed through the halls of justice. 18 years. I sat in the front row of the courtroom, my posture straight and my eyes clear, watching as the bailiffs led him away in chains. He turned to look at me one last time, his eyes searching for a shred of the woman he had manipulated for a decade, but he found only a stranger. To me, the man who left me to die on a cold gravel road no longer existed. He was a memory I had already evicted from my heart. I walked out of the courthouse and stood on the wide stone steps, letting the afternoon sun touch my face for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The toxic weight of my husband was gone, lifted from my shoulders like a heavy, suffocating shroud. I looked out at the city I had built, the skyline I had conquered, and realized that I had not just survived a murder attempt. I had been reborn. The architect of my ruin was behind bars, and the architect of my future was standing right here, ready to build something even stronger and more beautiful than before. I am Elena Vance, and for the first time in my life, I am truly free.